You know, Tara, I want to pick up on the Rev's point about the civil rights organizations out there that are engaged working with the Reverend, National Action Network, and others. 150 of them, by the way, wrote a letter to the president urging him to push harder for those 2 federal voting rights bills to pass. They write in part, while we fully support the ideal of bipartisan cooperation on voting rights, the partisan political agenda of some in the Senate cannot be allowed to block passage of legislation that has broad bipartisan backing. And we certainly cannot allow an arcane Senate procedural rule to derail efforts that a majority of Americans support. We urge you to work closely with Congress to support the passage of these bills, by whatever means necessary. I love that last part, by whatever means necessary. Talk to us a little bit about the gridlock in the Senate and what Democrats should be doing right now to sort of break that stranglehold that Republicans seemingly have, and how things would go if the shoe were on the other foot and Republicans were trying to get significant, important legislation to them passed through the Senate.
Well, Michael, I think we all know that Republicans are masters at using the rules of the Senate to their advantage. So I think it's clear that they would do everything it took to get what they want. That's what they did when they changed the rules and used the nuclear option to get judges passed. But I think that there is something to be said about being cautious about just blowing the filibuster up. Because when you're not in power anymore and you're in the minority, the filibuster is a useful tool. I know the history of the filibuster, and it's been used in ways that have been untoward in the past. But we have to think more than just what's in front of us now. Because what happens when Republicans take the Senate back over, and Democrats, there's something that they want, and you don't have or they want to stop, and they don't have the filibuster there as a tool. I think what's being discussed right now is a compromise where the filibuster is not something that's statutory. It is a rule in the Senate that can be changed. And there's a compromise being discussed now where you can make a carve-out. I believe Congressman Clyburn has discussed this as well as something that the House is talking to the Senate about. But there's a carve-out where you can use it for, you can withdraw the filibuster rules for issues that are specific to constitutional rights. Now, I think that there is a room for compromise there in a discussion that way, instead of just completely blowing up the filibuster, because I think that would come back to haunt Democrats if they did that and lost power in the future.
So, Neil, talk to us a little bit about the need for federal legislation in light of the Supreme Court decision we saw earlier this month on Arizona's voting laws. How do you see that weighing in on what Tara raises and Reverend Al about the filibuster and the impact on the behavior of senators?
There's no question, Michael, that federal legislation is necessary. And first, let me just say it is so exciting to see you in the chair, my friend.
Thanks, buddy.
I do. But look, I think that this conversation we're having with Tara, I think Biden and the Attorney General need to be stepping it up every day. This is not like other issues. It's not like infrastructure even. There's no constitution for infrastructure. There's no Bill of Rights about infrastructure. But voting is central to who we are as Americans. And giving a speech last Tuesday, even a great speech, is not nearly enough. And I understand the impulse, which is to reach across the aisle, not blow up the filibuster, and so on. But when one party is unilaterally making it harder to vote, both sides are not equally invested in a democracy. And that's one value we should be holding up much higher than bipartisanship. And it just seems like, how can we expect Americans to put their faith in the federal government when it won't even protect their right to vote? And the way to do so, as you say, is federal legislation. And that was struck down by the Supreme Court in 2013. I argue the predecessor case in the Supreme Court that saved it in 2009. And that was about the Voting Rights Act reauthorized in 2006. And Michael, the reauthorization vote was 421-3 in the House and 98-0 in the Senate. That was just in 2006. Now we can't even get, a dozen Republicans to come up and stand in favor of voting rights. There's something fundamentally wrong that's happened to that party.
Reverend Neil makes a number of important points, and I want to read a little bit more to you from the New York Times reporting, quote, in private calls with voting rights groups and civil rights leaders, White House officials and close allies of the president have expressed confidence that it is possible to out-organize voter suppression. according to multiple people familiar with the conversations. Now, I have heard an emphasis on organizing, said Cheryl Eiffel, the president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, who visited the Oval Office to meet with the president 2 weeks ago. But, she added, we cannot litigate our way out of this, and we cannot organize our way out of this. Now, I know you met with the president as well, and you've had these conversations both in person and through various channels. What's your reaction to the out-organizing option in this scenario?
Well, first of all, the first reaction I have, and I've said this to others both in the White House and among my colleagues in civil rights leadership, we shouldn't have to out-organize. We have the right to vote, and therefore we are arguing about whether or not Americans' rights are being undermined. And the Senate should have a work around this whole question of a filibuster and affirm our rights. I was in the courtroom during the oral arguments in 2013 with Shelby versus Holder, when they began really eroding the impact of the Voting Rights Act. Then the decision just 3 weeks ago by the Supreme Court that really, in many ways, carved out Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. They're making the Voting Rights Act, which has been voted on and renewed several times since '65 with Republican support. Now that the Republicans have become the cult of Trump rather than another of the national parties, they can't get any Republicans to stand up and deal with the fact that we're dealing with the right to vote. That's like telling us we'll go out and out-organize segregation or go out and out-organize other abuses to blacks that are being done by whites that are racist. We should be protected by the law, not told to out-organize those that are breaking or bending or eradicating the laws that protect us.
I think the Reverend's put a very fine point on that issue, if you didn't miss it, folks.